Alexander the Great sought to expand the Macedonian Empire into the northwestern Indian subcontinent, hoping to surpass the Persian Empire's previous borders in the Indus Valley. Despite his successes, one of his mentors, Aristotle, had a stark warning for the conqueror.
To Alexander the Great, my esteemed pupil. Greetings from Athens. News of your triumphs in the East, particularly your recent foray into the land of India, has reached our city, stirring both awe and curiosity amongst the philosophers. Regarding India, I urge you to investigate beyond the mere accounts of warfare and conquest. The Indian kings are very crafty, and word has come to me of the existence of an Indian maiden that can kill with a simple touch. These women have been raised on various poisons since their birth. I urge my pupil to be ever diligent and to remember your teachings.
The Secretum Secretorum, or Secreta Secretorum, also known as the Secret Book of Secrets, is a treatise which purports to be a letter from Aristotle to his student Alexander the Great on an encyclopedic range of topics, including statecraft, ethics, physiognomy, astrology, alchemy, magic, and medicine. In the Secretum Secretorum, Aristotle allegedly warns Alexander the Great of poisonous Indian maidens who can supposedly kill with a simple touch or in exchange of bodily fluids. These women were known as Vishakanyas. But how much of these women's reputations in history are based on fact versus myth? Today on Women in History, we will be looking at the historical references to these women and try to draw our own conclusions. The first documented mention of Vishakanya assassins, which translates to poison girls in Sanskrit, appears in the ancient Indian treatise on statecraft called the Arthashastra, dating back to around 340 to 293 BCE. The training of a Vishakanya began as a child. Girls were selected according to their astrology, which was used to predict if they were destined for widowhood. If they were, they would be recruited. After recruitment, each girl was fed a modulated diet of poisons, some of which would come from snakes. This practice, known as Mithridatism, was designed to render the future assassin immune to the poison they would use on their targets. Vishakanyas would usually approach their targets by seducing them and giving them poison alcohol. They would usually drink from the poisonous cup to gain the trust of their victim, and when the unsuspecting victim would drink from the same cup, he would ingest a double dose of poison into his system. Now, many girls did not survive the Vishakanya training, as they could not withstand the preparatory dosage, which they were taking as either infants or very small children. According to folklore, those who did manage to become immune to the various toxins would allegedly become human weapons, as their bodily fluids became extremely poisonous to others. As you can guess, any contact, especially sexual contact, was fatal to the men who had the bad luck to sleep with them. There also exists a myth that says a Vishakanya can cause instant death with just a touch. Now, for that one, I'm going to guess that the poison would come out of her sweat, and the sweat touched you, you would die. That's just my guess. According to Indian historical sources, a Vishakanya was used by Nand dynasty founder to kill the last ruler of the Shishanaga dynasty, both of which belonged to the mighty Magadha kingdom. Western societies were introduced to the Vishakanya from the pseudo-Aristotle treatise Secretum Secretorum, which conveys Aristotle warning his pupil, Alexander the Great, to be careful of lavish gifts from Indian kings. In one Hebrew version of this treatise, which is likely to be earlier than most, Aristotle says that he fears the clever political strategists of India. Another French version tells a story that Socrates and Aristotle told two slaves to kiss a girl and they both fell dead instantly. Other versions had the Vishakanya killed by bite, sexual intercourse, or even just an icy glare. 13th century Spanish author Guillaume de Cervera declares that Aristotle saved Alexander's life by using the same astrological techniques used to choose the Vishakanyas in order to determine who was a poison maiden and avert the attack. What's important to note, though, is that the original version of Aristotle's treatise has never been found. The earliest editions claim to be based on a 9th century Arabic translation of a Syriac translation of the lost Greek original. Modern scholars find it likely to have been written in the 10th century in Arabic and later translated into Latin in the mid-12th century, after which it became highly influential among European intellectuals during the High Middle Ages. Now, how much people believed in these women in the West at that time cannot be known, but considering the superstition and views of female sexuality at the time, I can imagine a lot took these accounts of poisonous maidens quite literally, even the most extreme stories of men dying just by a simple touch. But if nothing else, these tales of Vishakanyas demonstrated the Ayurvedic concept of Satmya, which translates roughly to adaptation through change, which would definitely have been of interest to medical study. This concept posits that when we become habituated to ingesting something impure, we eventually become immune to its negative effects. For example, drinking tap water in certain countries could be bad for you because you haven't had time to adjust your body to the microorganisms or bacteria that could be in it, versus the local people who have. And of course, there are medical situations that require stronger and stronger treatment because your body has acclimated to what it was given before. So the tales of maidens being acclimated to poisons over time would have definitely been of interest to the medical practitioners of their age. So, what's the final verdict? Were Vishakanyas real? Despite the tales of poisonous female assassins being a part of Indian folklore, there is simply a lack of verification from other historical sources to definitively say which they were or they weren't. Me personally, I think the truth lies somewhere in between. Using female assassins is far from unusual historically. In fact, I'm sure they were probably more effective than most subterfuge, because most men would be susceptible to a beautiful woman. Do I think an Indian king thought to take it further by practicing Mithridatism? Absolutely. Biological warfare is nothing new. At the time that there were talks of Vishakanyas, an Indian king was also trying to think of ways to poison the fauna that the invaders would come into contact with as they marched across the land. From a practical, non-sensationalized sense, it is very easy to make a woman a poisonous maiden by having her literally poison her target, or sending her to camps with a venereal disease, which would then wreak havoc on the enemy troops. Which was true? Who can say? But the concept of these women has been around for centuries and has even found its way into media as an early archetype of the femme fatale, which makes them more than worth the myths, the legends, the speculation, and the appeal to the imagination that has endured today. And which also makes them worthy of mention here on Women in History.